All right, John, so that animation we just saw was pretty cool. How'd you even do that?
It's pretty simple. You basically just type in some text, then you extrude it, you bevel it a little bit so the light catches right, and then a little bit more complex part where you break it into like nodes and you have to like do like noise textures and color mapping and stuff like that. But it sounds a lot more complicated than it really is.
Everything you just said to me seems like black magic at this point from my skill level.
That's what it sounded like to me about a year ago, so it's understandable.
Welcome into the Creating with Creators podcast. Today I'm here with John Burke. I'm not saying my own name. We just happen to have the same name. We met working together at Johnny Cupcakes. I came in as a sales associate when he was in the warehouse, but it took a few years before I transferred to the warehouse to actually meet you. Mm-hmm. So it was great knowing that there's actually another photographer that liked Johnny Cupcakes that also worked from. So it was fun to work with you all the time. Mm-hmm. But we both, unfortunately, got laid off due to the COVID pandemic back in March. And we both went our different ways into the field of media. So you got super into 3D animation. So what exactly is it called in your end?
So it's basically 3D modeling and 3D animation. They're two different things, I suppose, but they're pretty much part of the same ecosystem. 3D modeling is basically just creating things with shapes for the most part. You kind of Lego piece it together, and then you can curve it out with like subdivision modifiers, things like that. It gets a little bit more complicated, but really you're just creating an object, could even be a cube, in a 3D space, and then you just animate it with like keyframes the same way. I think that's the same way you do it in After Effects, actually.
Probably. I mean, I've used I know After Effects does a lot with like the null objects. Like you put the camera in focus of the frame, and then like the program like works around where you put the camera in the frame. Mm-hmm. But is there a specific program that you're using to do all of this?
I use Blender. It's free to use, free to download. It's a very small file. It does bog down your computer quite a bit. Okay. It's quite GPU intensive. But it's free to use. There's the more mainstream ones are like Maya. There's Houdini, which is node-based, kind of like DaVinci Resolve. I don't know if you're familiar with that, the color grading
I
software.
know people have definitely said it in the videos I've seen. I've never seen the software in person.
It's node-based, so it's a little bit more complicated than Premiere,
right,
which is what I'm used to. But for the most part, I just use Blender pretty much only, and it's fantastic, and it's free to use. It's super complicated at first because it's like every single thing is a hotkey.
Right.
But coming from like Adobe, everything's a hotkey anyways. So I transitioned pretty easily.
That makes sense, because I feel like the one nice thing about a lot of editing programs, even though they're all differently, they all work in a very similar kind of fashion. So It's kind of like, it's like getting a new camera and switching from like a Canon to a Sony and just getting used to the button layout in a sense.
Exactly.
So what made you decide to actually like go and like pursue this like once we separated?
So I've been a fan of Pixar basically my entire life. But I remember, and this is probably 7 years, when How to Train Your Dragon came out.
It's a sick movie.
It's a great movie. And I remember watching it and I could like see how it was put together just a little bit. And I was like, I think I know what they're doing there. And it always fascinated me. And then I kind of forgot about it, shelved it for a little bit. And then at the beginning of the year, I was like, just feeling a little stale. So I kind of got back into like feeling creative, and I was like, I really want to like do like sculpture, blah, blah, blah. 3D just lets you do whatever you want,
right,
whenever you want.
I'm glad you went 3D and not like stock animation, claymation kind of thing.
That sounds fun though. Yeah. But no, 3D is great because you can do whatever you want with it.
Right.
And it's quite the learning curve, to be fair, but it's all relatively the same as everything else. And coming from a camera background like you and I, the 3D, all the lighting, you have to pick your camera,
right,
your focal length, everything. So it all works together, and it makes you like a better artist in general.
Right. So like when I was like watching your Instagram stories of when you were putting all these things together, like it seemed like you started with like a character and then you figured out how to make a background and then put the character in the background. Like what's like the starting point that someone should try to go to in this like whole animation field? Like what's the first thing you should try to figure out how to do?
First thing you should do, especially if you're going to use Blender, because that's free.
Right.
You can go on YouTube to just Blender for beginners. You have to learn how to move things, how to scale things, how to insert keyframes, modeling. You have to learn topology and stuff when you get more into like the character design. It's a little bit tricky, but it's super fun. And the gratification you get at the end of finishing a 3D project is second to none.
So how many hours would you have to put into it just to get like one scene or like a 10-second clip?
So you've seen some of the videos I did.
Right.
Like a video of like a guy walking for like 15 seconds. You probably do it probably took me, with the background, the character, it probably took me 40 hours to make all that. And then just to render it takes hours just to do seconds.
How many times have you seen your computer crash trying to render, or just the whole program get upset and just stop?
It happens quite a bit. Blender is a little, because it is free.
Yeah.
It does have its quirks. It's not like Maya or one of the more industry standard ones. But as long as you're safe and you stay within your parameters, it usually won't crash. The thing is, if you accidentally put an extra 0 and you make 1,000,000 faces instead of 100,000 faces, all of a sudden it just goes and it just shuts down like instantly.
So who are like the creators you like suggested YouTube? Like who are the people that you followed on YouTube that slowly learn how to do this?
On YouTube, well, I bought a Udemy class actually to begin with, and that was super helpful. And that was a more thorough in and out kind of thing. But nowadays I've Ducky 3D. Highly recommend Ducky 3D. There's Blender Guru. There's a few guys that you can get on there, but I'd say Ducky 3D is my go-to guy. He explains it the best for me. That's
always great, because like I think one of the most important things, like especially in the creative field, because it's so impossible to know everything from the start. Once you can find a few guys that you like and you like watching their content, it really helps you try to figure out that field even more. Because I feel like, I'm assuming it's got to be like the same thing in 3D animation, where you think you got a hang of it, then you take another step and like you fall another 6 feet.
Oh, it's with 3D, if you have the wrong number in the wrong place, or you put just the wrong weight on something, everything just falls apart.
Yeah. So like one thing I'm kind of curious about is there a lot of like, how heavy of it is just coding?
For me, almost zero.
Okay.
Now, when you get into the procedural node-based stuff, there's a lot of math. It's not really math, but it's like a lot of it's like binary, kind of like Photoshop.
Okay.
The mask, you have like black and white to paint with masks. It's very similar with like color ramps. Your black and white values, they're like a binary thing, but there's like a gradient in the middle.
Okay.
So it's like bringing the blacks up or bringing the whites down, and that kind of, like, it's math based,
right? But it's realistically, it's more just kind of like moving like different things around. It's not like
it's tweaking, yeah.
Okay, you don't have to go in like, for example, like a Python and like literally enter in like exact code.
No, but Python's big in the 3D world. Okay, I haven't dabbled in that at all.
When I was in middle school, I went to like a charter school, and they forced us to learn how to do Python. And when I say like they forced us, it was just like, you have to get this project done by now. So one kid would figure out, and we'd all copy him.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember, if I put a dash wrong, or I put a 0 wrong, or if I like hit space one too many times, or it would crash, I was like, I can't stand this. I'm never touching it again.
Yeah, Python, from what I've heard, is extremely complicated.
Yeah, and then people say Python's like extremely complicated, but it's the easiest one to start with. I'm like, that's great.
Yeah, so certain things are like Pixar. I couldn't even tell you what they use because they have their own software now.
Right.
They've like created their whole new thing. Like with Blender, I don't have to do a lot of coding at all. The node stuff gets very complicated, and you're changing values of literally everything you could think of, light bounces, all that stuff. But as far as coding goes, 0.
That's great to know for anyone listening to this who's thinking about getting into it.
Yeah, no, coding sounds difficult, and I'm sure it is, but you don't need to do coding. So
where do you see yourself going with this?
It's hard to say. I'd really like to get a job in the 3D world just to continue to grow. But for me personally, it's my little side project, Doug. I want to make like a legit little short film about Doug.
Nice.
And that's like my goal at the moment.
So do you have got like a kind of like a little bit of a plot we could kind of tell?
A little bit of a plot, yeah. Okay. So Doug has big hands.
Big hands.
He's black. like as the night. I mean, he's just like pitch black. He's like a plastic polymer texture. That's what I used on him. He's going to live in a world with really colorful, glowing creatures. And they all have really long legs and tiny hands.
Okay, so he's like the opposite of all.
Yeah, he's like the black sheep, more or less.
Right.
And then there's going to be some aliens that drop cubes. And one day they're going to drop a cube on one of these people, and he's going to save them because he's got the big hands that can move the blocks. And then that's going to be, more or less, he's going to be like a ugly duckling hero kind of character.
I think Marvel might be looking at you in a few years.
Well, I hope so. That'd be fun.
So actually, like, getting into that, like, what are like the biggest challenges of trying to like actually put all that together?
There's quite a few. Like I said, I remember one time I just clicked the wrong thing. All it takes is one click in 3D. And I went to walk my character, and his elbow went that way, his legs went that way. It just turned into a mess. And there's a lot of times where that kind of thing happens. Yeah. For once, I had a walk cycle where he was just walking, and there's this little spot on his hip. It kept popping up. I was like, I have no idea what that is. Yeah. It's like, is it bad topology? I have no idea. And I don't really have a lot of friends in the 3D world. Right. So I didn't know who to ask. But just trial and error, I found out that I had just accidentally clicked the wrong hotkey and just painted a little bit of influence on a weight. Yeah. And it literally was just popping his hip out every time he walked. And when I figured that out, that was like the greatest day of my entire life. It was
just like, oh, I kind of know what I'm doing. Like, eureka.
You feel like you know what you're doing. Yeah. You know you don't, but you feel like it for that split moment. You're like, oh, nice.
Like the once I figure out like a camera pan or just like an editing trick, like I really get the whole like in-camera transition, like nice. I'm like, this feels fantastic. And then I get to like the next transition. I'm like, how do I get from point A to point B?
It feels impossible. Yeah. But just keep going.
Right. Actually, like, there's one thing you brought up a lot, and I know it has a lot to do with especially color grading, but what is a node?
So a node, basically, a shader, kind of like in Destiny, there's a shader is just like a material within the 3D thing. So you can use nodes in Blender instead of your shader, and basically a node could be a texture, or it's basically just a box, and you have to like link all these boxes up together, and you can manipulate pretty much every single aspect of anything in 3D, which is awesome, but also very daunting. Yeah. Because it's a lot.
It's like your project times infinity, and you're just like, what am I supposed to do with infinity?
I don't know. Did you see the brick wall that I made?
It was the brick wall exploded?
No, that was a lot easier than a node. I made this brick wall, and it was basically all procedural, so you could put it on a flat plane. Okay. But when you render it, it looks like a brick wall. It's kind of hard to explain, but it took me about 50 node boxes and probably 3 days to figure out how to do it. And all it does is make a brick wall. Yeah. And I could have just copied an image texture with a bump node and be like done with it. Nodes it's called procedural. It's a very intensive, but also very exact. So you can, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like ones and twos, blacks and whites, but also gradients. And then you have to like set up lines and stuff for every little box that you want to use it on. Yeah. It's all very complex, but it's one of those things I'm slowly starting to learn. I don't really know what a node is though. Yeah. It's like its own thing. Like
I'll see like this whole like when I go through Instagram, I'm trying to learn like color grading for like videos and photography. This guy will keep popping up, and he's just like, he shows you what his original footage looks like, then literally shows you the footage after he applies like 10 different like things.
Is it Quasman?
Yeah.
Yes. I know you're talking. That's a node. Yeah. Those little boxes. Yep. That's the nodes. It's a very similar to that. So let's say one of those boxes for video grading, it would be basically taking one could just be like a highlight box. And then you set your factor from like 0 to 1 on the highlight. Yeah. So you could bring the highlights down, or you could pop them. So you layer all those together, and that's the guy that gets me into. That's DaVinci Resolve. That's that software.
Because anytime like he's either showing you like a clip of like what he's doing, just 10 different sliders on the same clip, and like that looks amazing. How do you even get there? Or it's just like his setup. It's like 10 computers. 4 keypads, like then like he's got a box with like sliders, and just like, how do like your fingers even work that?
I feel like he's just doing that for the gram,
Yeah.
to be fair. And it looks great.
Yeah.
I just saw he recently just like broke like a $10,000 like monitoring screen, like rough.
Yeah. Rough day.
Real rough day. But he's great. But that's like, that can help you understand like what a node is. It's those little boxes all have like a value that pertains to whatever its thing is, like a highlight or a shadow value, a color. It's all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, that's why that DaVinci Resolve seems to have a little bit of a learning curve compared to Premiere, which is a little bit more like Lightroom when it comes to coloring.
Is it like for like me, and even though it's not like a 3D, it feels like if Premiere is like Lightroom, Photoshop is like After Effects in the sense where it's almost just like once you get the hang of Premiere, and then it's just like, what do I even do in After Effects? And it's just like you have to look up like one thing how to do. Like I kind of want to figure out how to make look like a Nerf gun is firing bullets. I really want to learn how to make like a lightsaber.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know how to do that in Photoshop, but I don't know how to do it in video.
Right.
You can also do it in Blender.
Yeah.
I haven't dabbled in the lightsaber realm yet, but there's a lot of tutorials for it. But they always use After Effects at the end.
Yeah.
Because then you have to composite your 3D stuff into After Effects. Because that's how you add it to your footage.
Makes sense. So with everything going on, like what keeps you going? Like how do you find like the time to work on this with your schedule?
I basically just every morning I do 3D for about an hour or two when I wake up. Make a coffee and just hop on the computer and I just do whatever project I'm working on. Make a scene for Doug. I've just been doing sets recently. I've been working on like a woodsy, rivery scene. That's been pretty fun. But yeah, just every day, just get up and just do a little bit. Just pick at it a little bit every day. You get a lot further than you think you would.
Yeah, it's just like one of those things where I feel like people, any kind of creator or any kind of artist or person who's trying to get into it, they see like everyone that's super successful and they're like, how do I have the time to do that? But just spending like an hour or two a day just working on one thing and then switching gears to something you really need to focus on, that 1 hour or two a day will be 5 to 14 a week. Then that can easily be 40 hours a month. And then it's just like, after a while, like you've already spent hours in getting how to like know how to use like an image or a product or a program. That was the word I was looking for. Mm-hmm. And then like, just like it's kind of like a slow roll. You have to realize that it's not all going to happen at once.
Well, with 3D especially, I remember when I first started, I was trying to just make a well.
Yeah.
And it was just following the tutorial. I was like, I kind of get what's going on, but it was so... I look back on it. It was like, I started 3D about February 9th, I think was the first day I did it last year. So I've been doing it for less than a year. If I could have showed myself then what I can do now, I would have been like, no way.
Yeah.
Like it seems impossible, but it's a little bit every day.
It's like, I remember like one of the things I worked on like forever when I first got into video, I got my camera, didn't know any single video setting that I was supposed to do, and I left it on automatic like a noob.
Yeah.
And went to try to shoot like this kid's like music video, and it was just janky and awful. And like the thing about auto is that it's constantly changing the setting, like the light settings, the white balance, and just like you go back and you watch all the footage and you're like, it's literally changing colors every 2 seconds. Like what was I thinking?
Yeah, video's very exact.
Yeah.
Because you got to lock those settings in. So you want to set your white balance right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because one thing I've realized, it's really easy to fix the white balance of a photo. Mm-hmm. Premiere is not that forgiving when it comes to white balance.
It really comes down to your codec and like what your camera can do.
Yeah.
That's why like those really expensive like Arri Alexa movie cameras and the Red cameras, stuff like that, they have so much more leeway in the back end. But when you're using like a DSLR, you want to get as much right in camera as you possibly can when it comes to video. It's
like I was when I was in a photo store the other day, like they had a Red camera you can rent. So it's like, how much would it cost to like rent this today? And they're like $1,000. I'm like, I don't have that. It's just like so expensive, those cameras, but one day, John. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think
there's this guy Trago on YouTube that I watch, and he's like, he works in the industry. He doesn't really say what he does. He's kind of mysterious.
Yeah.
But he's always talking about the camera. He's like, most people just rent. Even in like the industry, like most of those directors, they just rent cameras. They don't even buy them.
Right.
So it might be expensive, but if you have like a movie planned out, you can plan out for like a week of rent. It's like film like your whole thing.
Yeah.
It never works out that well, but if you could, that's kind of the move.
Yeah, because it's just like, why spend upwards of 20 to 30 grand on a camera when you could rent it for just like under like $5? Mm-hmm. All right, so tangenting into a little something else. So you've been doing a lot of product photography and kind of learning how to shape light, what light to use. So do you want to kind of start with like any kind of basic on that?
When it comes to shaping light, I'd say there's 2 rules of thumb. 1, square softboxes, not great for people, unfortunately.
Right.
You want to use square for product stuff, and you want to use like an octabox. There's even octaboxes that have a little bit of like a scrim that makes it like a perfect circle instead of an octabox. So it like really mimics the sun. And that's what you want to use for people. I've seen there's these things called parabolic umbrellas.
Yeah.
They're super expensive. They're like $6,000 for an umbrella. It's ridiculous. But those basically have like 20 hot spots. So you can literally light this. The light travels like a laser beam.
Okay.
So you can have your parabolic set up 30 feet away and it'll light up your subject and you can just have them moving freely. It's really fascinating insane stuff. That's more for like fashion and portraiture, which isn't really my forte, but those things are really cool.
So what would be your forte then? Like, do you do like individual like products sitting on a table?
I like, just a product sitting on a table. I like to do with like a little bit of like I've been learning a lot about like trying to use acrylics to kind of, and then like it's all about like shooting angles. So when you do like a product, like let's say deodorant,
right?
Just for example, you want to shoot it from like down, so it's like looking up like a hero shot,
right? So
like call it
looks like bigger than it is.
Exactly, and it kind of has like this perspective that makes it
like macho, bravado,
exactly,
yeah.
And it works with products. I'm sure it would work with people too, but with people you got to make sure they have a good chin line, or else they're gonna look.
I mean, like with people, I feel like the basic rule of thumb is you shoot guys up for that exact reason, and then you shoot girls down. But like one thing like I recently did was playing around with like my toy car, and so I was like messing with like where I should have the light coming from, and I figured like for at least the car it's best to have the light coming straight down on top of it. But it's like, do you find with like different products like basically coming up at the angle like our light is right now, or up top, or like down below? Because like a lot of it's camera placement, but like have you found like a nice like sweet spot for lights on certain items?
Well, for me, I've always been really into side light.
Okay.
Now that's not always what you want, because side light leaves a pretty dark shadow on one side. I like personally one light and one side light.
Right.
Like, I like a side hard shadow. But for more commercial stuff, you want to have a pretty balanced light. So I usually find somewhere towards the middle, off center a little bit, because you want to have a little bit of texture to your product. But a lot of the trickery in product photography is taking multiple shots, keep your camera on a tripod so it doesn't move, and then take your flash and kind of move it around and get different lighting on different parts of the bottle, deodorant, whatever you're doing. And then you kind of pull it all together in Photoshop. Yeah. It's like a little secret, but...
Yeah, like there's so many product photography, especially with food. Like the thing is, the average person, when they watch a food commercial, they just see it as like, whatever, McDonald's. But like as like a creative, like I see the shot, I'm just like, how did you like...
Oh, just to even make it look like that.
Yeah.
It's so difficult.
It's literally just like all the material isn't what it actually is, because it'll go bad or melt or just like fall apart. Or then like, especially the most, I think, amazing shots is when it's like a cheeseburger coming together. And it's literally like it's on a string. They cut the string. The camera has to magically go with the motion. And then I'm assuming
robot arms.
Yeah, I'm assuming they literally have to go into every single frame and then you erase out the string.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
It's probably super meticulous and time consuming. And you probably have to do that take 100 times at least.
Or it's just like they have the unlimited amount of budget and they've got those photography robots where you see the videos and it's just like a camera with an arm and then it goes like, boom. Like it just like maps it perfectly. But even that,
there's no way they're not doing that.
A million times.
Yeah. You got to do it over and over and over and over. There's actually this guy, like I believe he's based in the UK. It's Tin House Studios or something like that. He's a food photographer. And he's always he uses like one light for most of his stuff. But like I saw like a burger shot that he did, and the burger was like leaning back, and he had it like stuck up on all these toothpicks, so that, like the compression from like the angle he was coming in, so it would look flat, and like it's so much more than people think it is. When like you see like a picture of a burger, it's like, oh, that looks nice. It's like or especially when it comes to like product video, it's
so much camera motion. Like anytime I see like there's an Instagram page called like Art of B-roll, and anytime you see a video on it, like they make it look so easy. Like the top half is literally what it looks like in post-production, and the bottom half is the guy moving his camera around, and they make it look so easy, like handheld, like pan, punch in, punch out, and then you go to try to do it and you're like, why is nothing in focus, and why can't I get like organized with the person I'm shooting with? Or another big YouTuber that basically has been made famous by a bunch of other photographers, but he's now like the main product guy on YouTube. But you know Daniel Schiffer, right?
I'm really bad with names.
Okay.
If I saw his face, I'd probably recognize him like that.
Yeah, so like I think he's now like the guy everyone goes to for inspiration, because a lot of his YouTube channel is breaking down like how he does his shots and how you could do them. And it's just one of those things where it's like so much of it is camera motion, but what people don't realize is you're doing the shot like 20 times over just for like 2 seconds, and then you go to like the next shot and it's only 2 seconds of video, but probably take like 20 minutes just to get the shot in.
People don't understand it's like a craft.
Yeah.
You don't just point a camera and just, ooh, perfect. Works every time. It's arduous.
Yeah. So when I shoot product photography, John, I'm using the only camera I have, which is the EOS R with a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. What I find I struggle with sometimes is the focusing distance is very limited sometimes with that lens, which makes it hard for product photography. Because in a video I was doing with a toy Jeep, I really wanted to get up super close to it, so when I would put it in post, it would actually be full framed in focus. But the distance of the like how close I could get with my camera like really limited that. So is there a specific kind of camera or lens someone would be thinking of with product photography? Because how close do you actually have the lens to the product?
It's a great question. And there is a lens. It's a macro lens, pretty much. Usually people think it's just for taking pictures of very small things. But the power of the macro lens is, I mean, I can focus this close
right
with a 100 millimeter lens. I mean, when you're using a macro lens, you have to bump your aperture up pretty high to like f16, somewhere on there. Because if my macro lens, it's 2.8. But if you're shooting at 2.8 with that macro in that close, with that compression, I mean, you're talking like a hair sliver of focus. So macro lens is almost a necessity. There's also tilt shift. I know a lot of food photographers use tilt shift lenses. I've never messed with one of those. Those allow you to kind of angle your focal plane. So like, if you wanted your focal plane to go almost like diagonally and backwards a little bit, you could have something in the foreground in focus and something in the background in focus just by shifting the focal plane instead of being what it normally is, which is flat here or here. You can kind of angle it.
That's like almost like 3D in 2D.
It's like exactly what it is. And it's pretty complex to set up the things right from what I've heard. But I'd say macro lens, almost, you can't go wrong with the macro lens when it comes to product photography. But the tilt shift is another big one that I know a lot of people use.
So if you had to pick like a macro lens, what focal distance, like 35, 100, like what, like if you had to choose a first lens for someone getting into it?
If you're getting into product stuff, you want to go above 80.
Okay.
Because you want the compression. Because they want your products, they want them to look realistic. Now, wide angles, which are great, and you could probably even get away with some of that wide angle stuff for like those hero shots to really like exacerbate it, but you want the compression that's going to give you a nice, clean, true to life image. So most of them, the macro lenses usually start around 100, but I've seen some like 200, but you want to go about 100 millimeter macro is probably your best starting point.
Right. And just because it's the most fun lens to play around with, we see all the YouTube videos about it, but the probe lens that all the big YouTubers just like to play with, if you had one of those, what would be the first thing you'd want to go out and shoot?
I'd want to do something like entering some kind of circular thing so I could get that like warp, worm tube kind of vibe. I've seen a lot of them, they cut off the back of the bottle and they kind of like come through the back. That's probably something I would do. Maybe like a whiskey commercial. Yeah. That'd be kind of fun.
I'd want to do something with like a drink pouring. So you could start at the back of a bottle and get like literally the liquid coming out of the top of the bottle. And then maybe like be able to like then shift it down. So as it's coming out of the bottle, you get like the super crisp detailed shots of the drops then hitting the cup. Like I could see like imagine like a cool like creamer bottle coming out, and then it comes down, and then it hits the coffee, and then you can get the color changing of the coffee. I think that'd probably be the first thing I try.
That you'd probably need like 3 shots and like figure out a way to like blend them in post so that you could kind of like come from the back and then catch it coming out and then have like a nice detailed shot on like the coffee splash.
Yeah.
I think speed too. I don't know what that camera does for the frames per second, but those, when they have like the 480 frames per second, like those real slow motion, like chocolate powder. Yeah. Those look so nice.
It's like, I remember like getting my camera and seeing 120 for the first time. I was like, oh my God, 120 is amazing. And now that I'm so used to 120, I'm like, whatever. And then I show someone 120 that doesn't know camera, and
they love it.
They love it. I'm just like, imagine what this would look like at like 1,000.
I don't even know what those cameras cost. Yeah. But I know they ain't cheap.
No. It's something I want to use. Like, just like, if I'm a YouTuber one day, to just find like someone who has those cameras and make a video with it, because I have no idea what I would need that for.
Here's my thing with the 120 even, because the camera I did, it does 4K, but it only does up to 30 frames per second, which is fine for me because I'm like a 23 point whatever, 25, whatever. That's like your kind of your go-to. Yeah. What I found is the slow motion stuff is nice, but it's almost kind of gimmicky. Whereas like I wouldn't use it that much. Yeah. But it's like I want to like rent one just like, because certain shots you really want that slow motion because it makes the shot.
Right. Even just like it's slow mo, like you literally just need that high of a frame rate because you need to be able to then like speed ramp it to go with the rest. So like gimmicky is when everything is slow motion, but then you want the super high frame rate so it can literally, the slow motion or the ramp up helps with the transition to the next scene.
I guess I'm just more of like I like cinematography, and like I just like that 24 frames per second movie look. Right. But even movies, it's like, so if I was going to make a movie, I'd at least want one slow motion scene.
I think it was the movie with Will Smith. It was like Gemini Man. I think they shot that whole movie at 120.
Does it have like a soap opera vibe to it?
I never saw it, but I think...
I didn't either. I heard it was terrible.
I think the whole plot of the movie was like a younger Will Smith was trying to kill the current Will Smith and like an assassin kind of thing. But I was just like, when they told me they shot it at like a high frame rate, it's like that must have been annoying to like scrub through and edit the whole thing.
Oh, it must have been a nightmare for the editors. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. So just because you brought it up earlier, actually, let me see how much time we have left on this right now. For some reason, the timer doesn't say it to me. Okay. We got like 12 minutes. All right. Just a tangent, something non-camera related because you brought it up earlier. Are you a big video game guy? Because you mentioned Destiny.
Yeah, I used to play Destiny with my friends. The raids in that were really fun, kind of like Warcraft, but not quite as intense. But lately I've just been playing League of Legends, but Destiny's super fun.
It's like, for me, when I watched my brother play Destiny, I looked at him like, this is what Halo could have been like, but then Bungie left. So I'm just like, I look at what Halo is now, I'm just like, what happened? I remember I saw a meme the other day, and it was just like, say something like, hurt me. And then the answer was, Halo 3 was like 10 years ago, you've been living on a lie. Like, you know, Halo will never be the same. It's like, why'd you have to hurt me that much? But that's the reality of the situation with that. But I know like my friends play a lot of League of Legends when they're not playing an RTS Total War with me. So I know like League of Legends is probably not big in the world of professional gaming. So is there like a certain thing that like someone who doesn't know anything about it should know?
League of Legends, all you need to know is Faker.
Yep.
He's a little Korean guy. Okay. Glasses. Super adorable. He's the best in the world. And if you come across that man, you just walk the other direction. All right. He will destroy you.
Is it because he's super like strong, or is it like counter, or?
He's just, I don't know what it is. First off, the Korean server is where all the elites are. Then the European server. The Americans are just way, way, way down the totem pole. But there's a Korean team, I believe it's SKT. I could be wrong. It's like most of them are like sponsored by like cell phone companies and things like that. Of course. There's like Toshiba, I think has a team even. But the Koreans seem to be just so much better. Yeah. Everyone in America with their eyes closed. It's kind of embarrassing.
Do you remember when we did the shirts for the Boston, what team was it? Do you remember?
I do know what you're talking about.
The Boston esports team. I know their colors were blue and yellow.
I can't remember the name because in the esports world, maybe Fortnite is won by Americans, but I feel like everything else is just.
I can't wait for Fortnite to go away.
I've never played it.
It's like one of those things that was fun to try, and then you realize that you can't compete if you're a console gamer playing against a keyboard gamer. It's just
that makes sense.
Because like literally in like 2 seconds you build a fortress. I'm just like, I can barely build a ramp and like a shield.
Because they probably have like macros on their keyboard that just like does 4 things at once.
Or it's like, I've got a friend that plays a lot of video games and like he can do it super quick with like his controller, but then it's like you see someone with a keyboard and they literally just go like this and boom, they have like a whole fort. But I remember like the one last game I played was Warzone. Mm-hmm. And I was like, old school Call of Duty, and then I remembered like I don't have the time to be good at Call of Duty.
Oh, it takes practice.
So I fell back into like the solo RPG kind of world, and I've just been waiting and waiting for the next Elder Scrolls to come out.
Is there a due date on that?
I don't think so, but it's been like 10, 12 years since Skyrim came out.
There was a Skyrim. There was like some kind of open world like MMO type version, right?
Yeah, so they did like Elder Scrolls Online, which was like
I played a little bit of that. Just a little bit, but that game was pretty fun. I don't know if you ever played Warcraft.
I've never actually.
You could lose your life in that game.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, you will lose your life. Everything takes hours and hours and hours and hours. You do one raid, you gotta like lock in with like 20 people for like 5 hours.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
Like the game that I actually lose a lot of time to, like recently that I did a YouTube channel with my friends for a little bit because we all enjoyed playing it. I wanted to just practice making like a streaming YouTube thing. And it was a game called Total War, which is very like, have you ever played Civ?
No.
So it's one of those kind of games where it's like you have like cities throughout a map. And now it used to be super history based, but they got into the fantasy world and they went with the Warhammer kind of genre. So it's kind of like you have a city and you're really only building something. You're building to like create armies. And the whole purpose is to create an army of like 1 to 20 different kind of units. And they all vary in different things. And then you just try to beat every other army with it. So it gets into super complicated like countering with specific units with magic. And like there's like swords, bows, like chariots. That was like the standard 3, and then they introduce like monsters and magic and like specifics within all of those 3 now. So it's just it's like a giant complicated chess match, and it's never not stressful.
I had a buddy who used to play Starcraft, and that was, I feel like, kind of similar to what you're explaining. It was, you basically had a base and you'd have to like build up different buildings to like build certain troops. Yeah, and then like you had like scouts and stuff that could like sneak around the map and stuff. But it was like legitimate war like chess matches. Yeah. And he was playing with like people from like China and stuff, and he'd be like up at like 3 a.m, but he was like hardcore addicted and he couldn't stop playing it. Yeah.
It's like one of those things where like the moment you think you know what you're doing, someone could just come in and absolutely crush you just because it's a luck of the draw, because if they built the army to counter your army and you just get crushed. Like for example, like if you pick a specific faction, the Warhammer one, like specific factions are good at different things. So you could build your army with that faction for its strengths, trying to counter what the other army being brought against you does. And then that person could outthink you and literally build the exact opposite to then in turn crush you. And it's just a mind game. And it's like one of those things where it either comes down to the wire or it's just out of the gate, you get blown out of the water.
Well, I imagine it's like chess. Do you play chess at all?
I used to as a kid. When my friends all started watching the Queen's Gambit, I roasted them all. Fun. Yeah. They're like, we want to learn how to play chess. So I played them, and I think I won like 3 for 4 just because I made one mistake, and then again, some of my friends got me. But it's like one of those games that's built to like teach like young princes how to lead troops.
I didn't know that. That's actually kind of fascinating. Well, I used to play chess a lot as a kid as well, and I used to think I was pretty good. And then I played someone who actually knew how to play chess,
and you just get smacked.
It was like, I imagine like what it would be like if I played against LeBron in a game of 21. There was no chance for me to
win.
Like,
you knew how to play basketball, but
I know how to play basketball, but all of a sudden there's just 20 points on the board and I have 0.
All right, pretend the podcast. What's your favorite piece to start with in chess? Like, what's your first chess strategy?
Knight every time.
Knight?
Yeah, knight just goes out.
They're random. I'm always scared of the knight.
Yeah, that no one knows what to do with it.
Yeah, I always like to I like to sneak my bishop out. Like I like to pick the pawn that's in front of the knight,
so you can bring it
move him out, and so I can move the knight, and I can like hide the bishop in the pawn. So if someone like leaves a hope, and I can just cut across and get him.
They never see the bishop coming.
No,
never.
Everyone's always focused on the queen, but Honestly, end game, the knights are the best pieces because you can like move your troops around to like figure out how to avoid like a rook or a bishop, but then it's just like you're doing all that and then you forget about the 2-up 1-over of the knight.
Yeah, the little L hook. I'm actually like hyper aggressive with the queen. That's always been my move too. I try to scare people.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, queen over here, queen over here.
It's like how they can go anywhere now.
And castles.
Yeah.
Castles are fun because they just boop, all the way up.
You just forget it, especially when the people do on like the king and castle switch. Mm-hmm. I've had people do that just because they think it's a cool move and then they just get cornered.
You think it's a cool move and you're like, it just looks cool and then it doesn't really do much except for leave you kind of vulnerable.
Yeah, it just traps you in the corner.
Uh-huh.
All right, but for wrapping up the podcast, it was good catching up with you, John.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
Yep, been a blast.